Today's video is something that I think a lot of you have been waiting for, and I'm comparing the Sony FX30 to the Sony a6700. These are two cameras that are very similar to each other because the a6700 has most of the same video features that the FX30 has. It also has a few different things, like you probably see the EVF right here, the auto frame mode. There's just a lot of things that this camera has that the FX30 doesn't have, and there's some things that the FX30 has that the a6700 doesn't have.
So let's talk really quickly about the image quality when it comes to the a6700 and the FX30. They both share the same sensor, so in an ideal world, they would have the exact same image quality, or at least similar image quality. And after doing my testing using the 11mm like we're using right now, and my Sigma 18-50, they look pretty much identical. I'm using the same grades on both cameras, and there really isn't much of a difference. The biggest change I've noticed is when you get to some of the higher shutter speeds, the cameras don't exactly match. For instance, they both max out at 1/8,000th of a second, but if you go to, like, let's say 1/6,000th of a second on the FX30, the closest you can get to that on the a6700 is 1/64,000th of a second. And of course, you can adjust that in your flicker-free modes, and I'll do a video on that in the future. Other than the image quality, the only two features these cameras share that are exactly the same like the sensor are the FZ100 battery and the smart hot shoe on the top of the camera, which you can actually use accessories like the FX30 top handle on the a6700 if you have an FX30, an FX3. That being said, there are definitely some better options because the FX30 handle is meant to screw into the top of the FX30, the FX3, and you can't screw it into anywhere on the a6700, but there are Sony versions of the XLR module that don't need to be screwed in.
So first off, we'll talk about the glaring difference, which is the EVF. There's obviously no EVF on the FX30. Now, I think there are specific shooters that need the EVF. I actually have really grown to like the EVF on this camera, but most of the time for my professional video uses, I'm not using an EVF. I have this camera on a gimbal or it's on a tripod, sometimes with an external monitor. So the EVF isn't something I need for professional video, but it's something I absolutely love for travel video, for vlogging. The next difference is going to be the LCDs on the back. The resolution on the FX30 is a considerable amount better. It's fine on the a6700. It's not terrible. There is a difference, especially when you're outside. Just the resolution itself makes a difference for critical focus and whatnot. Now, when it comes to codecs, these cameras share most of the same codecs. However, the one thing that's missing from the a6700 is the high bitrate 4K 120 mode. And it kind of makes sense because that's really the only mode that you absolutely need CF Express Type A cards on the FX30, and you don't have CF Express card Type A on the a6700. It's just V90 SD cards at the most. Another difference between these two cameras is the fact that the FX30 does have an internal fan. On the FX30, none of the video modes will overheat whatsoever, where in the a6700, depending on if you're indoors, outdoors, time of day, humidity, whatever it may be, the a6700 will absolutely overheat indoors. It may not overheat in 4K 24, depending on how cool it is. The lack of the fan in the a6700 is why if you're shooting exclusively video and you're shooting professionally, you don't want to risk overheating at that point, and that's where you will be covered in the Sony FX30. Now let's talk about being modular. The FX30 is obviously a much more modular camera than the a6700. It's got mounting points all over the body, much more modular as far as mounting stuff, mounting the camera to different objects without even having to have a cage, where if you want the a6700 to be modular, you are going to have to get a cage for it, which isn't the end of the world. We've been using cages for years. The FX30 I'm shooting with right now for this video, I have a cage on it. There are two recording SD card / CF Express Type A card slots in the FX30, and there is only one in the a6700. Now, for me, why it's a big deal is when I'm filming weddings, for the most part, if I have two really big cards, I don't have to change my card out for the wedding. I can just use the two cards, maybe have a third card, and I'll be okay. I don't record to both SD cards at the same time. It's cool that you have that option on the FX30, which you obviously don't have on the a6700. But for me, it's more about being able to just keep going, keep shooting, where I noticed on the a6700, when I was using it quite extensively, I did have to do card swaps. Even with an 128 gig card, I was doing card swaps. There's only one slot. It's all about target audience. And I think the target audience for this camera won't be probably shooting as much as I do. Now let's talk about IBIS. The a6700 has 5 stops of IBIS, which is pretty fantastic, while the FX30, even though it shares the same sensor, it actually has 5.5 stops of image stabilization. Now, when I shot these vlogging tests out with the Sony 11mm, to be fair, I really didn't see a huge difference, especially when active stabilization was on, but it is a feature that is different between both cameras, so it is worth noting. Now let's talk about the AI modes. There are no AI modes on the FX30. That is a chip that was added to the a6700 and the Sony ZV-E1. However, where the a6700 is a little bit different from the Sony ZV-E1 is the fact that it's using the 6K sensor that was on the FX30, meaning that when you're using the auto frame mode, you're actually getting a higher resolution to auto frame in. So if you plan on using that mode a lot, you will get sharper shots on this camera than the ZV-E1. So at that point, you can have much smaller, lighter lenses than the ZV-E1 and get similar image quality. Just have a much smaller setup in general and be able to film yourself. I think that's kind of the whole benefit of these small APS-C cameras, is the fact that you can get them really small and lightweight, and now with the auto reframe mode, you can film yourself, have similar quality to the full frame cameras in a smaller package. The AI also gives another benefit when it comes to autofocus. The autofocus is a little bit better on the a6700 than the FX30. There are animal, bird, vehicle tracking modes on the a6700 that aren't on the FX30. You're using the FX30 and you're mostly filming people. I don't really think that's going to be a huge deal, but I think for a lot of travel filmmakers, content creators, vloggers, whoever may just be picking this up and going almost like a GoPro, I think those AI autofocus features are definitely going to come in handy. Both cameras do have the same FZ100 battery, so whether you're pairing the FX30 with the a6700 like I am, or you're taking the a6700 and using it with some of the full frame cameras that are more recent from Sony, like the a7S III, FX3, it'll be nice to be able to share the same battery with all those cameras. You don't have to use a different battery, carry different batteries with you. And then the last glaring difference between the a6700 and the FX30 is going to be in the photography modes. The FX30 is pretty much a video first, video only camera. It can take stills, but it doesn't offer burst modes. It does have a time lapse mode, whereas you can do burst photos on this camera. It does have a mechanical shutter. So it's supposed to help with the rolling shutter a little bit for photos. For video, I don't think it really makes a difference. Then with the burst modes, you just get a lot more photography features out of this camera than you do with the FX30. If you need a photography camera, the a6700 is definitely going to be a better option. By making this video, I hope I can help in your decision-making process on which camera is better for your needs, whether it's the FX30, the a6700. I know they're both similar, but they have their own special feature sets. So if you have any questions, make sure to ask in the comments below. And if you got knowledge and value out of today's video, please feel free to hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell to keep up to date with the latest videos from the channel. And until next time, my name's Geoff Fagien. Thank you for watching, everybody, and I will see you in the next video.